What's going on, everybody? This is Jerome Moore, host and creator of Deep Dish Conversations. And firstly, I want to say thank you for all love and support, and thank you for exploring the perspectives of social change with me on this platform. I want to encourage you all to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube and on your favorite podcast listen platform. And make sure you give us a 5-star rating if you're loving the Deep Dish Conversations. I appreciate all of the support again. I hope you all enjoy this episode.
This is deep dish, right?
Yeah, well, let's get deep.
So I'm going deep on both sides.
Steve, how you doing? Welcome to the platform.
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm really excited to talk about science in the Venture Science Center.
Yeah.
And just being the CEO and president of the Venture Science Center here in Nashville, and the history of that and what you all have going on and things like that. But I like to start off by talking about a little bit about you.
Sure.
Originally from Texas.
Sort of. I was born in London, actually.
Oh, okay.
And then I was the child of two university professors.
Oh, okay.
So we moved a little bit with their work. I moved to Minneapolis and spent the first few years of my life in Minneapolis. And then when we got tired of shoveling snow every winter and got, over the cold, then we relocated to Texas.
Texas.
So, yeah.
Okay.
So I always say that I grew up in Austin.
Yeah.
That's where I feel like I grew up anyway.
I just seen that that Austin and Nashville had the biggest rent increase in the nation.
Yeah, it's not surprising. I think both are obviously very, very strong markets, and both are very popular places for folks to go. And especially now that the economy's shifting dramatically, people look to places like Texas and Tennessee as at least economically a little bit easier than some of the coastal places or some of the larger cities, Chicago and so forth.
At the moment.
Yeah, at the moment. I don't know. I keep telling folks that I feel like that that price differential is starting to even out quite a bit, especially in terms of housing. It's not as big of an advantage anymore here.
Yeah.
But we still seem to be attracting a ton of people, and for better or for worse, I think it's pretty exciting to be in Nashville as it's growing this quickly. Having grown up in Austin and seen, not the end result, because obviously Austin's still growing, but seeing where Austin is now, I think there's a lot that Nashville can do and learn from a community like that try to retain a lot of its original identity, but then see if it can scale to a big city while preserving a little bit of what made Austin special, which was just a very community-oriented space.
Right.
People felt like you could get to know everybody, get to know the city really well, and you could. And I think they're trying to keep that, and I think that's one of the things that Nashville's trying to figure out.
Yeah. Hopefully we figure it out.
I hope so.
I want to also congratulate you too. I just came across this the other day. The Leadership Nashville class of 2023.
Yeah.
And so you made it one of the participants in 2023. So congratulations. I think I read it was like 99 applicants and they had to choose like 44. And
yeah, I think they said they had over 200 applicants. Not that
wow.
It matters, but
that makes a big.
But yeah, being part of that program is something that I've wanted to do for a few years, and obviously the pandemic sidetracked a little bit of my ability to do that, but also the program. And so I'm just glad that I've been selected for it.
Yeah,
I feel very honored to be a part of that.
Yeah, no,
it's got a great legacy here. So.
And I was looking at the other participants. I said, oh wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I know when I'm in there, I'm like, somehow they chose me in that group.
Right. But, I said, oh wow.
Yeah, I will be listening to a lot of what happens in that space. So.
Yeah, no, and I just randomly was like, I think it was the Nashville Business Journal. I was looking, I was like, oh, what is this? And I just happened to go through it and see your name. I was like, oh, well, I got to make sure I congratulate you.
Yeah, well, thanks. I appreciate it.
No.
I'm very honored and excited to be a participant.
And so I want to get into how you got into science. Yeah, I don't know if many people know this, but I remember you had telling me like you started off as a school teacher.
I did.
Biology, chemistry, psychology.
Biology and physics and anatomy and physiology.
Okay,
were really the topics that I focused on. Although originally when I started, I was also teaching earth science, which was kind of unfamiliar to me, but you just wrap your head around it as quickly as you can and try to make it something that kids can get interested in. So when I started teaching, I was teaching middle school, and then eventually wound up teaching high school over the course of the 10-year career that I had in the classroom, and I loved it. It was a really, really wonderful 10 years for me. Loved connecting with the kids, loved imparting some understanding of the world, but more importantly, trying to get them to a point where they didn't need me anymore,
All right.
where they were curious and they were figuring out how to learn for themselves. And
All
then
right.
you just kind of watch them take off, and that's pretty exciting.
I got 2 questions for you around that.
All right.
The first one is how did you get in? Did you always want to be a teacher? Is that something? How did you get into? I know you have 2 parents that was professors,
Yeah.
respected teachers themselves. So how did that?
Well, so funnily enough, the irony of having 2 parents that were teachers. Mom eventually shifted away from sort of teaching, and she was just more of a not just, but she became more focused on software engineering and so forth. So
wow.
she went that route, and then Dad stayed in teaching in the universities, and he was actually cautioning me against going into teaching. He said, "Don't do it because you'll never make enough money," and so forth. And at the time, I thought, well, that's not what mattered to me. I wanted to do something that I was passionate about. I wanted to do something that I thought would make a difference and maybe leave the world a little bit of a better place than how I found it. So, no, I didn't always want to go into teaching. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a professional soccer player.
Okay.
And then realized that wasn't going to happen.
Well, you was right in what you born in one of the meccas, London. You know?
Yeah. And soccer was a big part of my existence all the way through college and so forth. So it was definitely a big part of my life. But as I got a little bit older, I got exposed particularly to 2 really great teachers. Mrs. Kimball, when I was in 5th grade, she was a tremendously powerful influence for me. Just a great teacher, great person all around, and really for me inspired that love of science when I was young. And then I got a continuation of that in high school with my freshman year biology teacher, Fred Breckwald.
Okay.
And he was the one that really got me focused on biology and potentially going into medical school as something that I was passionate about. So when I went to college, I actually was sort of going in that pre-med track and went to a school that was pretty well known for that, and then realized pretty quickly I didn't have what it took to I wasn't gonna be able to do it.
Right.
First of all, I like sleep, and medical school and doctors in general, they're just made of a different constitution.
Yeah.
Not only in terms of their brilliance and so forth, but also just their ability to stay motivated,
Right.
even when they're exhausted.
Discipline.
It's amazing. Yeah, the discipline behind it
Yeah.
is truly extraordinary. So as I was getting through college, I thought, well, teaching is another good way to make an impact and change communities and so forth. And so I got my first taste of teaching when I was in college. I got to teach one of my own classes that I was participating in. It was evolutionary biology.
Okay.
And I loved it. It terrified me because I did not like public speaking. And to some extent, it's still something that I have to really work around.
Right.
But I loved the interaction that I had with my classmates and
Right.
helping them learn something, that it became really something that I wanted to spend more time doing. And so
Right.
when I got out of college, I started looking around for really pretty much any job, as many people graduating college will do. And it was a school that wound up calling me that I had applied to. They had a teacher that had to retire, and they asked me if I would be interested. And so I went and interviewed, and next thing you know, I was standing in front of a bunch of 7th and 8th grade kids.
For 10 years.
Pretending like I knew what I was doing, and learned quickly, just enough to stay ahead of them, I guess, a little bit. And then, kind of found my groove year 2, year 3, and then, kept going for a little while. And then at the end of 10 years, I thought, all right, time to do something different. Didn't know what it was, so then I left teaching, just traveled for about a couple of years.
Oh, wow.
And then got a call from a science museum in Dallas. It was actually a parent of a former student of mine who was on the board of that science museum, and they were hiring somebody for education, and
Right.
he thought maybe there would be a good fit there, and so that's how I wound up in science museums. Yeah.
So I want to pivot back a little bit to school.
Yeah.
On my second question.
My school or the school I taught?
School in general.
Okay.
Like just
Yeah.
school in general. Middle school, elementary.
Mm-hmm.
We just had a mass shooting in Texas.
Yep.
As a former teacher, did you ever think, did that ever cross your mind, did like anything like that even like think about even occurring, as a teacher, and like being even prepared to train? I remember when I was in school, we would we would do tornado drills. We have drills of like it was somebody was just unexpectedly in the hallway, like not supposed to be on it. It was like a lockdown.
Yeah.
But never a threat of like a weapon or a shooting happening.
Right.
They didn't even talk to us about anything like
Right.
that.
Right.
Right. And so so what are your thoughts on those type of things, that have happened, over the years in schools as a former teacher?
How much time do we have here?
Yeah, we got much time as you need.
I will say that no, it never really entered our mind.
Right.
You just can't go into the classroom continually focused on that. At least not top of mind.
Right.
Maybe it's back somewhere
Right.
in your training or in your preparation for being a teacher or being around kids. But honestly, it's extraordinarily unfortunate that teachers have to even think about it, or that we have to have drills to train kids, to train teachers how to deal with something like that. It should not exist. It shouldn't happen. It shouldn't be part of the students' realities. To some extent, adults, just by virtue of being older, by virtue of having more life experience, can perhaps compartmentalize some of that thinking a little bit more, to where it doesn't create overwhelming anxiety in them on a day-to-day basis. But how do you communicate to a 3 and 4 year old child, or a 3rd or 4th grade child even, that this is a possibility?
Right.
There are people out there that want to do harm to you, and they may find a way to do that here in this space.
Right.
How do you communicate that to them without them absorbing that and being impacted by that permanently, and that being part of their thinking in that environment, to the point where it gets in the way of their education, or gets in the way of their social, emotional well-being? I don't know how you do that. We shouldn't be having these conversations, honestly. It's a shame that we have to, and we do have to, but we shouldn't be having these conversations. There should be no threat to the students from that perspective inside that room.
Well, I want to throw this back at you. As a leader, CEO and president of a whole facility, a team, a staff,
Public space where people are coming and going.
Public space, people are coming and going. Has that been on your mind now that the Venture Science Center, right? In Buffalo is a grocery store, right? That a public space could be a target for domestic terrorism.
Absolutely. Yep.
And has that been something y'all thought about before? Is this something new, or is it like where you are on things like that?
Sadly, it's not new. It's something that we've had to think about for years.
Okay.
When I first arrived in Nashville in 2017, we didn't really have a security standpoint, so we very quickly put a security guard there, and we've made a number of changes to the way that we train our staff to understand the building and understand what can happen in some of these public spaces. But then also, we've gone through some changes to our physical building as a means of trying to keep staff safer and keeping the public safer in certain circumstances. You cannot predict or protect against everything, but you do what you can, and try to find that balance again, as I said, of being prepared for an eventuality that you hope never actually transpires, but not letting that cloud your everyday thinking and be continually present. It's just, again, I don't know how you could maintain that mindset and stay positive and stay joyful and stay happy. And at the end of the day, a science center, if it's to be anything, it should be inspiring. It should be joyful. It should be happy. It should be a place where people want to come because it creates good memories for them. And the potential for that to change in an instant is hard to accept. But it is a reality, and we have to prepare for that. I'm hopeful that there will come a day that we don't really have to prepare for the types of things that we're seeing now. There will always be something. Can't prevent everything. But right now, it's almost like we're not even trying to prevent some basic things from happening. There are some obvious answers that are out there. We just don't want to wrestle with them. So,
And so I want us to lean in, since we on like social issues right now.
Yeah.
Science is a like a melting pot of just like social issues. I mean, when you talk about science, whether it's conservation, climate change, whether it's gender identity,
Yeah. Feeding the public,
clean
air, clean
air.
water. Yep.
It's all science, right?
is, yeah.
It's all science. What is the Venture Science Center kind of social responsibility to community around that, and have you all kind of responded from an educational level to kind of be on top of those things and make community aware about all these various science things that are happening in community, and kind of being like doing what the Venture Science Center is supposed to do: educate, and impact, and making people aware, and people can come learn.
Yeah, it's a good question, and clearly there are some very large issues to tackle.
Right.
There are some that become very political very quickly that, you sometimes have to tiptoe at least into the conversation a little bit. Sometimes you just say, forget it, we're diving head first, and you go in. But it's an interesting climate sometimes to bring up a lot of these conversations, because one would hope that presenting factual information to a member of the public, as long as it's rationally thought out and well explained, and it's not using so much jargon that the person can't relate to the language and so forth. If you present it in the right way and you present factual information, one would hope that people will listen to that. But studies actually show often the opposite. The more that you try to present people with an opposing viewpoint, with facts that prove them wrong, often the more they dig in. It's a really wild phenomenon. So you have to think a lot about how you present some of the conversations. If you just come on with full force and say, we're going to sort of bowl you over with the facts that prove that you're wrong, you're almost never going to get somebody on the other side of that dialogue to say, oh yeah, I guess you're right. I've been doing this wrong the whole time, and my whole sort of paradigm, my worldview is now shifting because of this conversation. I mean, in a perfect world that would happen, but if social media has proven anything to us, there's often a lack of a willingness to engage in dialogue, much less be receptive to the dialogue that's happening. So that means we have to be really thoughtful in how we approach a lot of these conversations. So, and I'll give you two different scenarios in terms of how we approach them. When it came to COVID and helping people understand, obviously the dangers and, the realities of mask wearing and getting vaccinated and so forth, we took a pretty strong approach to that. We didn't sidestep the issue and try to soften it or, see if everybody was willing to have a conversation about COVID and so forth. There's a reality that's out there in the world. We don't have time to try to get people to feel good about being ready to have a conversation and then actually have the conversation. I mean, people were dying by the thousands and thousands every single day. So for us, we needed to do something as quickly as we possibly could and just present good information. And even if that meant that some people moved further away, if there were some that moved closer to that truth, that was something that we took as a win. And so we did a series of conversations with Dr. Jahangir and a number of other folks, particularly at Vanderbilt, both on the infectious disease side and then also on the pediatric side. Alex, of course, was the COVID czar for Nashville, and we just presented the factual information. We weren't trying to make anyone feel a particular way about being wrong or whatnot. It was just, here's the information. Y'all need to listen to this, and this is something that you need to take into your own value system and make some decisions based on that. So we went, I think, pretty hard at that topic because that was critical for us to do. And as a science center, interestingly enough, the public view of science centers as being truthful and non-biased and so forth is actually, it's pretty good. To the extent where we can be a pretty effective and sometimes a more effective voice for these dialogues than places that seem biased, like a public health department, or the government or whatever it may be. There's a lot of trust that is built into science centers, and we take that very seriously. But it is something that we also were able to kind of step back on and lean on that in that time where we were trying to get people just to listen to good factual information from the people who knew it best. So that's one approach. And then you've got environmental issues, climate change, deforestation, and other sort of related elements around that. Again, very third rail topic for a lot of people.
Right.
If you start going up to people down on Broadway and say, hey, let's talk about climate change, 99% of them are going to run away from you. You have to think about how you approach the conversation just to get people willing to listen, and to that point where they can, kind of feel comfortable and not judged in listening. And so this fall, we're going to do an exhibit called Recycle Rainforest.
Okay.
And effectively what it really is it's a place where families, anybody can come and they can use recycled materials to create, design a creature that may live in the rainforest. It may be based on something that's real, or it may be something that comes purely out of their own imagination. But the idea is come into this space, be creative, and while you're here and you're creative and you're receptive to this idea of rainforest and habitat, now maybe we can take you one step further and talk about habitat loss. Maybe we can talk to you about some of the environmental threats that exist out there in the world. And then if you're willing to go there with us, now we can bring that conversation down to the local level and say some of the decisions you make on a daily basis here in Nashville have global implications, right? And so that's a way that we can sort of gently guide a dialogue into that space. Because at the end of the day, we're a free choice learning institution. We're an informal education space, as some of the dialogue means. And what that really means is not just it's not that we wear shorts and tank tops all the time. That's not the informal side. The informal side is we don't have that formal structure that a school may have, where we can compel people to come to our space, where we can compel them to go through a learning narrative. We have to find other ways to attract them in because they don't have to be there. And so that's where a lot of that nuance comes in terms of having a conversation with them. And hopefully, for example, this fall, people will come out of the Recycle Rainforest experience not only having a great time, being creative and building that skill set, but also starting to think, hey, there are things that I do in my daily life that I can improve that ultimately make critters that are half a world away have a better life. And those things matter to me, and they impact my day-to-day.
As a CEO and president of Venture Science Center, especially around social issues, and as a white man, it's a certain privilege.
Absolutely.
Certain privilege. And, with this kind of, I would say, awakening, probably since, more specifically because of the George Floyd murder, you see a lot of organizations, people in general, just trying to see what they can do more of and do some self-reflecting and learning and see how they can relate that over into what they do, especially in leadership roles. What type of reflecting have you been able to do since our society just really, since 2020, George Floyd, just really trying to figure out like there's issues that we need to address on every level, from a community, academia, organizational, institutional level. What has been that process for you as an individual, and then how's that kind of been related over into your work and kind of what the Venture Science Center do, maybe training for staff and things like that?
Yeah. Well, that's a huge question too. There are a lot of different ways to dive into that, and as I start talking, if you want to dig into any one particular thing,
we got time.
We're good.
We got time.
Here's what I would say. I agree with you 100% that there are a lot of elements of privilege that have put me in the seat that I'm in today, and I think the way that I look at that is you can look at that power, which is ultimately what it is, right? You can look at that power probably through a lot of different lenses, but I'll break it into two just to keep it simple. One is there's power that can be kept and there's power that can be shared. I believe that it's a power that can be shared, and I have an obligation to share that. So for me, the position that I have there is about how can I empower my team and how can I bring more people from the community to include them in the conversation, to give them some of the power that otherwise I might feel compelled to keep. And that's been a lot of how I've run the organization since the day that I got there. So for example, when I arrived, there was a conversation between two people that would create the entire organizational budget, and then it would be, here, Jerome, here's your budget. Well, that doesn't give you a voice. And it also doesn't value your experience. It doesn't value your expertise. It doesn't
Right.
value your intellect as a person to be thoughtful about the world that you want to create. It also doesn't condone or convey trust,
Right.
right? That's a broken model,
Right.
in my view. And so for me, the way that I approach that conversation is, all right, Jerome, this organization believes that you're the best person in that position to do the work that we're asking you to do. I generally am probably going to feel like the people that surround me are smarter than I am in their particular areas, which I actually really like that.
Right.
It makes me feel very comfortable letting them go and do their
Right.
thing, but also it minimizes my ability to micromanage them, to know that I feel comfortable that they're smarter at their job than I am. But also it takes some of the power that otherwise would be sitting in my seat and gives it to them. And honestly, that's a very comforting feeling to me. Heaven forbid, gosh, we went through COVID and all of that. If I thought that I had to be responsible for everything that got that organization through COVID, that's an overwhelming amount of weight to carry.
Right.
But knowing that the team was capable and smart and able to do this was an extraordinarily comforting thing to me. So I believe that power is meant to be shared, that it is meant to be given to other people to help empower them to ultimately take my job or take whatever job it is that they want, because they've been given some ability, they've been given that step up, whatever it may be, to improve themselves, improve their circumstance, and improve their condition. It's the same thing with making sure that the kids in the community have access to our space.
Right. I know equity and access is a big thing.
It's a huge thing for us, right? At the end of the day, again, we can dive into this a lot, but at the end of the day, a lot of the topics that you mentioned earlier, climate change, access to clean water, clean air, how we're going to feed everybody, right? Where are we going to put people? How are we going to move them around? All of these big, huge questions that we're wrestling with at their roots are fundamentally, the solutions to those are fundamentally rooted in science and technology.
Right.
And if we don't solve some of those, there are real consequences. People are going to get left out of the existence that they want to have in the time that they have on this planet, right? I mean, there are real consequences to not figuring out how to get access to clean air, to not figuring out how to get access to clean water.
Right.
These are equity issues that we've got to wrap our heads around, and again, rooted in science and technology. And so for me, the access and equity space, it's a moral imperative. I believe everybody is entitled to education and the same type of education. But the other side of that is, if we don't get as many brains thinking about these things, so thinking about climate change, thinking about how to improve quality of water and air and all of these other fundamental things, if we don't get as many people as possible on board with how to figure these out, we are delaying the solutions that eventually will be found. And every day we delay those solutions, there are real people who face consequences for that. And so that's what it really is all about. Yes, it's a moral thing, and we can have that conversation all day long. But taking it out of a political or moral frame and putting it into a pragmatic frame, saying, look, let's just put as many brains around the table as we can to figure these things out. That's how we're going to get there faster, and we're probably going to come up with better ideas. And we take that approach even on a small level. And that idea of bringing as many people, including as many people as we can, into what we do as a science center is, you see that play out through our exhibit design process. So we're currently in about a 2-year-long process. We've just started it, and it's very exciting to create a new exhibit up on our second floor. Right now we've got Body Quest, which is well loved. It's been there for 20 years, and that will be replaced in 2024 with Health, Sports, and Human Performance. I certainly don't have all the good ideas for health, sports, and human performance, right? Nor do I have the voices that the community should have in that. I mean, at the end of the day, the Science Center is a community space. It's not my space, right? It's theirs. And so what we do with our exhibit process is we create a community input group, and we look for the most diverse voices. We look for, social diversity. We look for economic diversity. We look for intellectual diversity, people that have interests in different topic areas. And we bring them into a room, and they sit with us literally through a 2-year-long process to help us come up with the best ideas that we can imagine inside that exhibit space. And it's rewarding, it's the right thing to do, but it's also It's kind of that same sense of, giving some of that power over to my staff and letting them do their work. It's fun every now and again to step back and see them succeed and watch the center become a great science center because of the work that they're doing. And similarly, it's exciting to watch an exhibit become a great exhibit because we've welcomed 25 voices from the community to have their say in terms of what should be there.
How many people do y'all serve on, like, I guess on any given, like on a non-pandemic type
On
of
a non-pandemic. Well, and
yeah.
it's a tricky question too because we've changed our operating hours.
Okay.
And so it's not quite an apples to apples comparison.
Okay.
My guess is this year we'll probably see somewhere between 250 and 300,000 people.
Wow.
And our fiscal year ends June 30th.
So what about in because you came on 2017?
2017, yeah.
So
and I don't remember. I will say 2019, the sort of last big year before the pandemic,
Right.
before we changed our operating hours and so forth, was about 385.
Wow. So almost 400,000 people.
Yeah, and even
Wow.
that was underutilized. There were still a lot of days where we could have had more people in the
Right.
building. One of the other underutilized spaces, in my view, is with the schools. I
Right.
think there's a lot more work that we can do there. I mean, some of that's just
Right.
because I'm a firm believer in education and
Right.
making sure that school kids have an opportunity to come to the Science Center.
Right.
But yeah, that's a big part of it. And speaking of which, and sort of along the same lines of access and equity, one of the things that I love about the Science Center is that all Metro Nashville Public School students and charter students within Davidson County have free access to the Science Center as field trips through their schools.
Wow.
And that's a condition of our lease, so that's
Right.
not something that we could change even if we wanted to.
Right.
And that to me speaks to some good thinking back when the lease was created, but
Right.
also just the importance that the Science Center has and how much value it can play in that learning environment. So. And I don't even know if I answered your whole
you
question.
did. Yeah,
There's so many different pieces to this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and as far as broadly speaking about inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, or
Right.
IDEA as we frame it, we started talking about that, years ago.
Right.
Again, when I
Yeah.
came on board, and we invited the whole staff in to a staff meeting, and we
Right.
said, okay, let's think about these ideas of inclusion, diversity, equity, and
Right.
access. What do they mean?
Yeah, I'm going to say because
Right.
what does that mean, especially in the science realm?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with the numbers, but in many, I know for like health, for example, I had Dr. James Hildreth on here,
Yeah.
and he was talking about like health, like any other thing, like the disparities of people that participate or are affected by our Black and brown folks, right?
Yep.
And so is that something do you all intentionally look at as well and say, hey, how can we involve more of the Black and brown community?
Yep.
And having access to this space, knowing that it's here, knowing that they are welcomed to either be a part of careers, educationally, those type of things.
Yeah, yes is the short
Okay.
answer to that. And so I'll also break that into sort of two components. The first part is making them feel welcome coming in the doors and helping them understand that the Science Center is a place where they belong. And then that second piece is once they're in the Science Center, helping them understand that, historically, folks from, minority communities have not been equal participants in cultural institutions broadly.
Right.
There was a huge bias there, and some of that still exists. And then you layer on top of that the world of science and technology,
Right.
which also have significant historical issues in terms
Right.
of inclusion and diversity. So there's a lot that needs to be corrected in that space. So when we think about welcoming kids from African American and Hispanic communities and so forth, and Nashville is a thankfully very diverse place, it's about first helping them understand that the Science Center is a place where they belong.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they're there, and a lot of times this is very subtle, but it's presenting them with staff and images and people in the exhibits that are reflected in the exhibits who look like them, who share the same cultural background that they
Right.
do, right? And this is another reinforcement that they belong.
Right.
But it's also a way for kids, if you're trying to inspire them to become a scientist or an engineer, you want them to feel comfortable. You want them to be able to visualize themselves in that career in 10 and 15 and 20 years.
Right.
And if they don't see people who look like them in those careers, you're negatively impacting the ability for a child to create a self view
Right.
of what they might eventually become.
Right.
And so whether it's using images in the galleries or bringing career professionals or hiring staff who are reflective of all of the different communities in Nashville, again, that's part of the experience at the Science Center, and it's
Right.
part of helping them walk away feeling inspired.
Right.
Because if you can have great exhibits, you can have really, really, really wonderful stuff, but at the end of the day, if kids come in and they don't see themselves reflected there, if there are people that they can't relate to or identify with, you've lost a huge opportunity to create a sense of, hey, I belong here,
Right.
and I belong in the world of science and technology. Right. And so there's a lot of work still to be done, but there's a lot of work that we're doing to make sure that we don't miss that.
And so I want you to talk. I have to make this connection so people know where the Adventure Science Center is and why what you're saying is so important. Because you have Fort Negley there,
Right.
and then you have where you have the first free black neighborhood on Bass Street, right?
Bass Street.
Bass
Yep.
Street.
Yep.
Excuse me, Bass, Bass Street. And so, those African American laborers and soldiers built and defended Fort Negley, right? And so where the Adventure Science Center is this history, right, of like African American folks and black folks,
Right.
here in Nashville. When you think about that, we talk about preservation, at the beginning of this, and we had conversations before
Right.
about preservation, preserving, and
Right.
storytelling,
And what that
means.
means, Right.
Knowing that Bass Street is there, Fort Negley, the African American community that was there, what role do you see the Adventure Science Center playing in preserving that history, that story, and just that access for people to understand the history was there, and making sure like it doesn't lose that with the
Right.
growth of the city.
Right. Man, you are asking a lot of the big questions today that I feel like
Deep this
we
conversation.
just- no
that's
kidding.
we got time. And I want you to I want you to take your time to unpack because we do have time, and so it's no rush on my end. So
Well, I think first of all, the Science Center is very fortunate to be in that space. Thanks to an agreement that was originally signed in 1967. When the Science Center lived in a different part of Nashville, and then it relocated over to its current location in the early 70s. So we're extremely fortunate to be there. We're fortunate to have the relationship that we have with Metro Parks that owns or manages the property that we have access to. And it's created, I think, a good opportunity for a public-private partnership and to illustrate that those types of relationships can function very, very well. It's not perfect. There are certain things that I know that we can improve over time, but I think by and large, we've got a good, strong relationship, and we love the folks at Parks. They've been good neighbors. They've been good folks to work with, and I know that they support the Science Center. So that part has been great. But I think one of the missed opportunities the Science Center hasn't done in the time that it's been there is really participate in the storytelling of what was there before. And there's a long history of that hill.
Right.
Certainly, I think, at least at the moment, one of the most important stories to really focus on is the Fort Negley story, as well as the community, the Bass Street community, that really sort of flowed from the laborers that were at Fort Negley. So I think there's an obligation for the Science Center to participate in that storytelling. And right now, Metro Parks is going through a master planning process for Fort Negley, and that really encompasses the full site, including the parcels that we lease. And so there's been good dialogue on our side with Metro Parks planning in terms of, okay, if Metro Parks is thinking about this for their parcels, what can we do to where the hill feels like an integrated storytelling space? And I think one of the most kind of amazing and fortunate things is that this place of particular history, and a lot of that history has been erased, physically erased.
Right.
But the site has some level of preservation to it. It's not
Right.
perfect. The buildings are gone, right?
Right.
But the site is somewhat well preserved to the extent that you don't have all other developments built on top of it, like other parts of Nashville where the history is completely gone.
Right.
You're never going to get that back. the fact that this area is contained within a park space and has the ability to be somewhat preserved is kind of amazing. And it's something that we do need to take advantage of. But I think that's where you really wade into a very difficult and complex conversation about what does that mean? You know, what does preservation mean? Does it mean you don't touch any part of the ground?
Right.
Or does it mean there are certain things that you can do on the ground or to the ground, carefully, respectfully, thoughtfully, right, with archaeology and so forth, guiding a lot of what can be done and where it can be done and so forth? Or is there something in between that? And it's challenging because there are so many people that have a vested interest in that space. The Science Center being one, Fort Negley, parks, and then you've got friends groups that surround that, and then you've got people in the community.
Yep.
And I haven't talked to everybody, but just in the last couple of years going through a lot of the conversations around the site, one thing that really strikes me is how little agreement there is on the how of the preservation work.
Right.
There's a lot of agreement on why and whether or not it should be preserved.
Right.
It's just a question of what does preservation mean? You know, is preservation really preservation of the stories?
Right.
Is it talking to the people that lived in that space before, you know, it was obliterated by the Federal Interstate Program?
Right.
And having those powerful firsthand narratives be really what maintains the legacy of the Bass Street community? Or is it maybe trying to rebuild some of the buildings that are no longer there, particularly the Bass Street Baptist Church? Should that serve as kind of an iconic piece that gets rebuilt on that site so that there is a tangible, visible reminder of what used to be there? And then you can go even further and say, well, so how do you tell that story? At the end of the day, it's a story with a tremendous amount of tragedy and sadness around it. And that can be consuming. But, and this is my personal belief, I think we have to find a way for there to be some story of hope that comes out of that so that it doesn't become a place where people just become paralyzed with guilt or paralyzed with sadness or something. Because, you know, those are tremendously powerful emotions that have the ability to stop progress and to stop creative thinking. And I think that's the big challenge that we're all wrestling with right now is how do you entertain all of these really, really different voices in the conversation and find that pathway, no matter how narrow it may be, that says this is what we're going to do with this space going forward. So,
and I think that's in a larger picture, that's kind of what Nashville is going through.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
You know, like what does preservation mean? What does it look like? And I think everybody is agreeing, like, yeah, we need to preserve Nashville in general. But
and I think part of it too is preserving whose story, right? Because historically, that's been very, very lopsided. And then also, even within that, it's if we decide that we are going to preserve, you know, the stories of the Black community, which of course we should, then who is it that preserves those stories, right? Certainly, it shouldn't be people like me trying to tell that story. And I think those are reckonings that the city has got to really embrace before it's too late. Right.
And that's I think we have the mayoral race coming up next year, and I think that should be a question for any candidate that's running for mayor, like preservation and what does that mean, and then calling out, right? There's still a context around that and around who's been affected. About not preserving or how the city has grown.
And who it's benefiting.
And who is benefiting, right?
Yep.
And so, good luck with that, Steve.
Well, here's what I would say, you know, and this sort of goes back to the beginning of the conversation. To me, that's the beauty of a program like Leadership Nashville, right? Is it brings a lot of the voices from all different walks in the community and starts to hopefully tackle some of these big conversations. And at some point you just have to pop a bubble. There are certain things that you don't have the time and the luxury to dance around. You just have to dive in and have a very uncomfortable conversation and be able to kind of put some ego aside, be able to put some of your own personal thoughts aside and say, you know, maybe I'm thinking about this in the wrong way. And that's something that for me over the last couple of years, particularly as it's related to our site, has been a continual process of my thought cycle is what am I not hearing? What am I not?
What blind spots?
What blind spots do
do
I
I
have?
have?
I mean,
Right.
we all have
We all-
biases,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
And I know that I've got those. And it's a continual process to check those biases and to check those sort of ingrained thought processes to think, maybe I'm thinking about this in the wrong way. And you know, one of the things that I will say about the site that we have and some of the work that we've been going on there, I tend to be a fairly pragmatic person. You know, like if the science and the data tell me X, then that's generally the way my thinking is going to go. But not everything can be decided that way.
Right.
You know, there is emotion, there is passion,
Right.
and those are good things. I think we have to be sometimes careful as to whether the emotion and the passion carry the conversation, and that's the reason we make certain decisions.
Right, of
Right.
course.
There's got to be a balance there,
Right,
right?
right.
And I think for me, I tend to skew heavily towards, well, the science, the data tell me this thing, so this should be what we do.
Right.
And maybe not listening to the emotional side as much as I need to sometimes, and that's
A true
a tricky
scientist.
thing. Yeah, it's a tricky thing
Yeah.
because you know the world is not black and white.
Right,
The world is
exactly.
not binary. It's not this or that.
Right.
And the other thing that I will say too is that the world is not a zero-sum game,
Mm-hmm.
right? Someone's happiness and joy doesn't take away from someone else's happiness. I
Right.
tend to believe that there's an infinite pie of happiness that we can just make bigger, maybe a infinite deep dish pizza
Right.
of happiness that we can just make bigger. And who doesn't like bigger pizza, right?
Like, if you don't like bigger pizza, like you must be a robot. You can't be human.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't.
I agree with you there. That is black and white.
That
Like,
is
if
black
you don't
and
like
white pizza.
pizza,
Like,
Yeah.
you're not from
I
here.
don't
You're
know.
not.
I don't know how to relate to that. That's a world I don't want to be in.
Right, exactly. Well, I really appreciate that thoughtfulness, Steve, and just that understanding. You know, and we all learning and growing as human beings, or should be. But that's why these type of dialogues I feel are so important
agree.
to understand perspective and continue to having these. And then they're going to be uncomfortable sometimes, right? But leaning into that uncomfortability and just doing that self work too,
Right.
and understanding your own implicit biases and your thoughts about things, are really doing that self work.
Right.
So you can come into other spaces with other people, just being better.
Right.
You know, and hopefully everybody else in that space is doing the same thing.
Right.
And I think that's how we make progress as a society, as a culture, as a community, and to make the best decisions that we know 10, 20, 30 years out, we're going to say, okay, we made the right decision here.
Right.
You know?
I agree. So I had a little league coach when I was a kid, Sammy Joseph Jr. He was
Sammy Joseph Jr.
Sammy Joseph
That's
Jr.
a baseball
Yeah, this is
name for sure.
growing up in Austin, and he taught me a lot, certainly around baseball and other things. But I will never forget, and this is a line that I probably heard when I was 10 years old, and it's stuck with me ever since. Was I will rarely fault you for the physical mistake. You know, you're going to drop a fly ball. You know, you're gonna, you know, make
Miss
a,
a
wrong- make a
ground
base
ball,
running
yeah.
error, miss a ground ball. You're going to do that. You're going to strike out, right? Where he will start to get more aggressive and where he will start to fault you more is when you make the mental mistakes, right? If you're just not paying attention, if you're not thinking through the game, if you're not mentally present in that space, that's where he's going to call you out. And I'll never forget that. And I thought, and I still do, I think that's a very powerful lesson to me, you know, especially, you know, again, taking it into a leadership position. I'm going to make wrong decisions.
Right.
It's going to happen.
Right.
But if I'm making the wrong decisions with the best intent and acknowledging that when I make that wrong decision, I can pivot and go the other direction, and that I'm going to learn from those mistakes, then I feel good. I feel like I'm doing okay. I'm not perfect, right? We aren't. And that's something that I take into this position and I share with my team. Like, we're all going to make mistakes. I'm going to make errors as it comes to dealing with the site story. But I'm trying to continually learn
Right.
and improve in that space. And I'm trying to be at least very thoughtful about how we approach some of these kinds of things. And this is where I think there's this beautiful word in the English language called grace, right? And
Yeah.
it's the ability for each person to give each other
Some grace. Yeah.
particularly in these difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And acknowledging we aren't always going to get it right. We aren't even going to see eye to eye.
Right.
But we've got to give each other grace in the sense that we can get better, we can improve,
Right.
And that the human condition will get better.
Wow.
So.
Well, I think we ended there, Steve. I don't know how that was the great ending right there. But no, but I want to give you an opportunity before we actually do close out to share anything else that we might didn't talk about, didn't cover, but just around the Adventure Science Center. I know.
Come visit.
Come visit.
There's a lot of great stuff going on, and I will say, my last sort of parting thought is, I'm just incredibly proud of our team, that we've kind of come through this very, very difficult time over the last couple of years, in a position where now we can make some of the changes that this community deserves. I mean, at the end of the day, the community, Nashville is becoming a global city, and great cities have great science museums, and so we're making a lot of progress in that direction, and I'm glad that we're diving into some of these conversations and that we're welcoming. I mean, the fact that we are talking to you tells me we're moving in the right direction, right? I mean, that's a great thing for me, and that you think maybe we have something of value to share. That tells me we're doing something right, and that's particularly rewarding. So, man, I'm grateful to be here. I'm appreciative to be on your show.
No, I appreciate your availability, and when I go into things, I started thinking about things like, what did I miss out on when I was younger, right? Or why wasn't I included, or why did my parents take me there, or why didn't I just know more about this growing up? Yeah. And those are the things that I tend to now intentionally try to figure out and talk to those people that are in those spaces. Like, hey, the Adventure Science Center is here. I think I can't remember the last time I've been here, but I want to know more about what's going on, because people that look like me are we're not here, or we're not going there, or we don't feel like it's available. Right. And so what role can I play in getting more people there, more people of color, more Black folks there, and just more community there? Like, hey, this is a space that hey, it's here, and they have a great CEO and president. He give you free tickets every now and then. they do that. They rarely say no, especially if you as a field trip or a group or a community. And so that's what I've been just trying to attack, just personally, spaces that I feel like I didn't see myself in. Yeah. And so intentionally going to those spaces now and saying, hey, what's going on? What can I do? How can we, get more people in here that look a little different than the people that are normally in here? Yeah. And so I appreciate your effort in doing that and talking to me and just being a good person, and really being intentional about where the Adventure Science Center is headed, having those tough conversations about the site. And just embracing all of that, and just being open though and available, because you don't have to be, or you couldn't be, right? You could be like, hey, well, we doing this and that's that. That's my statement. That's it. So I really appreciate you. Yeah. And I hope, there's more folks that are in leadership positions like yourself that are continuously having these conversations personally within themselves and reflecting, growing amongst their team, but just with the community. So thanks, Steve.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And again, I think there's a lot of people in this community that are willing to dive into this dialogue. It's one of the things that I love about Nashville. It's, by and large, I think it's a very approachable city. I think you can talk to just about anybody here. Right. Yeah. And meet them at a very genuine level. And I've appreciated that. So.
Well, Steve, got to bring you back.
Yeah, man.
I can't wait to come back to the Adventure Science Center.
Well, sure. What you can do is have us back in a little bit, and then ask us how we're doing. Because that's something that we need too. Is we need that accountability. We need people saying, "All right, this is what you said last time we were on this show." How's it going?
I'm pretty sure when they listen to this, they will. Yeah. I'm pretty sure your leadership class. I'm like, Steve, we heard you say this. Now how's that going? Yeah. How's that going? So
we're gonna check up on that.
Yeah, and then tell all the newfound leadership fellows, hey, come on Deep Dish. Yep. Come have a conversation.
I will.
So thanks, Steve.
Yeah, man.
Till next time.
Yeah.